Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the NCAA tournament and getting a chance to relax, dive into the excellent basketball that's being played around the country. Not, of course, by Ohio State, but the Buckeyes are doing things excellently on the recruiting trail. Myself and co-host Andrew Ellis are going to break that down on the latest episode of Talking Stuff on the podcast right now. Andrew Ellis joins us now. Andrew, happy Sunday. How have you enjoyed the first 3.5 days of the NCAA tournament? Are you watching it? How's your bracket?
I filled out one bracket. I think I don't even really know who I had win. I know I have Duke winning it all, but I admittedly haven't followed college basketball much this year. As an Ohio State fan, we don't have a lot to be too excited about. But I watched the end of the Michigan game. I haven't paid as much attention as I usually do. I admit that. So.
That's what happens. You've grown up, you're married, you have a house, you have all these things that take your attention. And it's unfortunate because as you get older, you should find more time for yourself and the things you selfishly enjoy, like basketball, and wondering what teenagers around the country are doing for their high school football futures. Instead, you have to deal with stuff like, is my wife happy? Does my yard need mowed? And it's garbage. And I feel like as people, we need to take a step back and realize that what's most important is where high school football players are going to college. And we should just stop worrying about all the other little stuff in life that no longer really matters because AI is just going to do it all for you anyway, you know?
Yeah, it sure seems like we're trending that way. So
yeah. What AI is not going to do is recruit the number one offensive tackle in the country for you. Okay. That's Jackson Cantwell. Ohio State has to do that themselves. Tyler Bowen has to do that himself. Ohio State has to be extremely proactive in trying to make a move for Jackson Cantwell, who did visit on Friday and Saturday. Friday. Sorry about that. He made a 2-day trip to Ohio State after a 3-day visit at Miami, which was followed by a 2-day visit to Michigan. Like, it seems like he's trying very hard to squeeze in as many of these trips as he can while he has a little bit of downtime between track and field events. I talked to Jackson Cantwell, number one offensive tackle in the country, 6'7", 320-pounder from Nixa, Missouri. Definitely a kid who is understanding of how to talk about recruiting. Like, he's not going to get too high, not going to get too low in any of his conversations about a specific school. But it's interesting for Ohio State, nonetheless, that the Buckeyes are one of the 6 finalists for him after what was essentially a 4-hour visit in December with Justin Fry as the Buckeyes prepared for the Tennessee game. He's now made his second trip to Columbus. Told me it went really well, that he found himself really appreciating Tyler Bowen and the style of coaching he does, that he understands what makes Ohio State a national championship winning program, and then finished up by saying that he needs to determine if he feels comfortable living in Columbus and ultimately how to schedule an Ohio State official visit because of the 6 finalists in his group. The Buckeyes are the one school he doesn't have a date set for, as he says he's trying to sort through his track schedule and exactly how to make it work. So, like, I'm leaving this weekend of Jackson Cantwell conversation feeling, I'm not going to say down on Ohio State's chances because I don't think I was ever up on Ohio State's chances. But I do think that the Buckeyes are still batting from behind here and getting to the plate with we're probably like in the bottom of the 7th right now. And the Buckeyes are down like 4 runs. And so I don't know how exactly you make that up, knowing that all the other schools are going to have at-bats and knowing that you don't have one scheduled. So for me, Andrew, it's like, what's the point of the visit? And do you have to just take it positive that he tripped, or do you leave it saying, well, would have sure felt better if the Buckeyes had an official visit scheduled as he left?
Yeah, I read your update after the visit. I came away from reading that. I thought it was a pretty meh update, not because of the author, obviously, just some of the quotes.
My writing is sophomoric.
Yeah, right. But obviously the big thing was, if you're an Ohio State fan, you would love for him to come out of that visit and say, yes, I am making an official visit on June 20th or whatever date. And the fact that didn't happen doesn't seem all that positive. Also, his comments about whether or not he can see himself living in Columbus, a little bit curious there. I think I can't remember if you mentioned it on the board or what, but he comes from a smaller town. So maybe it's going to be one of those things where going from wherever Missouri to Columbus, Ohio is just going to be too big of a change. But I mean, if you're an Ohio State fan and you're like thinking, well, Ohio State's 1A or 1B like they were for David Sanders, then that simply does not feel like the case. So I would not do that.
Yeah, not right now. And again, it's not meant to be negative. Like, this is just where things are. And when there's 6 teams in the mix, and as you mentioned, he's from a town of 24,000 people. Ohio State's student body has twice that number of people. Now, obviously, he's a 5-star offensive tackle. A lot of this stuff is just going to come down to NIL, and Ohio State could probably close that gap pretty quickly if they wanted to get super aggressive. But again, the Buckeyes don't do a lot of NIL conversation before the official visits happen. It's just not their way. It may be something that they need to do in order to change around their positioning in this battle, but it feels like Oregon, Georgia, and Missouri are probably the top 3, with Ohio State, Michigan, and Miami battling to stay in that mix. But I do think the fact that he brought up the size of Columbus, or whether or not he'd feel comfortable living there, it doesn't feel like it was an accident. I'm going to try not to read between the lines too much about what things are said directly, but I do wonder if the size and scope of Columbus and the size and scope of the campus at Ohio State is not what someone who is from a town of 24,000 people is looking for. Now, people will, of course, say, well, sure, but Georgia, Athens is a college town. Eugene is a college town. Columbia, Missouri, or are they in Columbia? The University of Missouri, is a college town. Ann Arbor, Coral Gables, those are college towns. Even though Coral Gables is close to Miami and Ann Arbor is close to Detroit, that's not what the campus is. Ohio State is a college city. Columbus is a college city, and that is significantly different than what the Buckeyes are up against. So, bottom line with Jackson Cantwell, I think it went well for Ohio State. He insists that the fact that he hasn't scheduled an official visit is not a negative for Ohio State. He says that it does not mean people should read into that. And I asked him point blank, should people view that as a negative? And he said, no, I'm trying to figure out the right date, but with track and everything else, it's hard. And especially because there's already 5 official visits scheduled. And Ohio State was really the last team to get themselves into this top 6. So that's where they stand. Is it a positive update? I wouldn't say it's positive, but should you say it's negative? I don't think so. The Buckeyes are proving that they can get into the mix for any player in the country. And from an offensive line perspective, Andrew, isn't it just about making sure that Tyler Bowen is staying active and that people are able to see what he's doing? Because I think if you look at the last week, we saw Tyler Bowen go all in on a number of different players around the country. Ohio State is going to host, as we talked about last week on Talking Stuff, there were, I think, 25 different offensive linemen that I was told Tyler Bowen is talking to every single day. And each one of those guys had a visit scheduled to Ohio State except for one player. And that was PJ Dean from North Carolina. So of the other 24 guys, all of them have a visit scheduled for Ohio State this spring in this 4-week window. I think 6 or 7 of them already visited this past week, including a number of players that were offered by Ohio State, guys like Aaron Thomas out there in Phoenix. I'm going to go down the list here. Pardon me for trying to do this while we talk. But there are certainly a number of players that Ohio State offered. Aaron Thomas was one. He's from Phoenix. His father played at Florida State. He's an FSU legacy. Aaron Thomas, Nate Carson, another. He's a 2027 from South Carolina. Tucker Smith, a 2026 from Arizona as well. And then you had other players like Oliver Miller from Colorado visit. You had Champ Smith visit. You had a Sam Greer visit, who we'll talk about momentarily. But it was a very, very busy week for Tyler Bowen. And what you're seeing from him is a complete departure from the approach that Justin Fry had, which is, I think, what people wanted to see. Now, doesn't mean you're going to land 5-star Jackson Cantwell. Doesn't mean anything for the quality of the players you end up landing. We'll see how that plays out. But the position that Tyler Bowen's putting himself in seems much different than what Justin Fry was doing a year ago at the same time.
Yeah, I think if we were to rewind time 1 year and we're talking this way, coming off of a Jackson Cantwell visit, not looking great there, I think the fan base would be wondering, like, what the heck are we going to do then? Like, who else is out there? Because Justin Fry just did not cast a very large net, I guess. And if you're grading Tyler Bowen's approach thus far, just his recruiting approach, I think you give him an A+ just on what he's doing so far. Now, obviously, December is when we'll truly find out, when the early signing period comes around, what kind of results are there. But just the fact that there are so many names out there that we're actively talking about, I mean, that's a major positive in itself.
Yeah. So on Monday, they had Micah Smith from Florida, Sam Greer from Ohio, Breck Colajay, who's from Colorado, who plays at IMG, Max Riley, who's committed to Ohio State the week before, Deron Parks from Sarasota, Florida, coming in, Pete Aglaitis from Columbus. And then on Wednesday, you had Oliver Miller, Aaron Thomas, Chancellor Campbell from Florida. Then you had Jackson Cantwell and Kelvin Obot from Idaho over the weekend. It was a very productive week for Tyler Bowen from a get to know you standpoint, because for all of these kids, it is essentially other than a player like the North Carolina or South Carolina, Nate Carson, who Tyler Bowen had offered when he was at Virginia Tech. None of these people have ever really had a conversation with Tyler Bowen, especially in person. And so it's a really important trip for Ohio State to just reestablish that, hey, we're going after you. And for players like Obot, players like boy, my brain is just fried right now. Players like Aaron Thomas, players like Oliver Miller, players like Tucker, Nate Tucker, not Nate Tucker, Tucker Smith. And Nate Carson, Tucker Smith, Nate Tucker, all these names I'm just confusing in my head. But
yeah, there's so many of them. Yeah.
Ohio State is really, really trying to establish themselves as a program that people are going to want to play the offensive line for. And talking to young guys around Ohio, like Mason Wilt, who's a 2027 from St. Clairsville, he visited on Friday as well. He said, he loved Tyler Bowen, and like the fact that he was so young and had recently played the offensive line, that was a real differentiator for him. And so the Buckeyes are just trying to establish that with the 2026 offensive lineman as well. But they are batting, again, I'm trying to play a little bit from behind here. And so you just have to get everyone on campus and then hope that you can really hit a couple home runs. And I think they did that. Champ Smith, things continue to move in a very, very positive direction there. We saw Aaron Thomas immediately scheduled his official visit to Ohio State. The reality is that other guys like Nate or Tucker Smith said he's getting his visit scheduled. We'll see what happens. Deron Parks, I'm not sure Ohio State's ready to go all in there, but if they really wanted to, I think he'd commit to Ohio State tomorrow. And then you have the big one, and I think this is the one that's worth focusing on the most, really, is Sam Greer, who visited on Monday. And I don't want to go into this saying that I think Ohio State was like losing momentum with Sam, but when Justin Fry departed, I think it's natural and obvious that things ground to a little bit of a halt while he let Ohio State get its feet back under it and to try to establish who exactly they were going to have run the quarterback or the offensive line room. And then for Sam, it was not just about meeting Tyler Bowen. It was about meeting Charles Dickey. It was about meeting Marcus Johnson, the two assistant offensive line coaches from Oklahoma and Purdue, respectively. And that seemed to really be a winning combination. Talking to Sam coming out of the visit, he was thrilled with the way things went. Talking to people around the Ohio State program, like there's a lot of positive buzz going right now that maybe any potential incursion from Missouri or Tennessee or Florida State, et cetera, that Ohio State feels like they've done a good job cutting off at the pass. I don't think that means that a decision is coming anytime real soon, because just Sam Greer insists that he's waiting until he takes official visits. But he did tell me, like, but you never know. And that is always kind of that asterisk that you're looking at going, well, if your ears are perked, the whole but you never know is something where you're like, well, okay, good. So I think Ohio State is firmly in the driver's seat again for Sam Greer, which is vital coming out of this visit week for Ohio State.
Yeah, not to rehash our conversation from last week, but for me, he's maybe the number one target on the board, regardless of position right now. And again, I don't care if he's listed as the number one offensive tackle in the country or the number 25 or whatever some sites have him as. But Did he make a trip to Michigan too this week, or was I imagining that? Do you remember?
I have not seen him make a trip to Michigan. I don't know that they're really. I know that they were early in his recruitment, someone that was talked about, but it's not a team that I've seen really linked to him in the last few months. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up making a visit there, because that's obviously a pretty good offensive line program. But right now it seems like it's more Missouri, Tennessee, Florida State, et cetera.
Yeah, I was just trying to, I guess, put together kind of a pecking order as far as who might be the biggest threat. I know when Justin Fry left, and maybe it was even before Tyler Bowen was hired, there was some Missouri buzz, and Ohio State losing a priority in-state tackle to Missouri would probably be a tough look, but doesn't seem to be trending that way, fortunately, as of right now. So,
yeah, obviously anything can happen. It's recruiting in 2025, but the Buckeyes feel good about where they are with Sam Greer. And the same can be said for running back Favor Aki, who visited on Monday as well. He was essentially being picked by everyone to end up at Miami. We thought maybe that would change if Ohio State offered, which the Buckeyes did on his Monday visit. He still is visiting Miami. He's going to visit Miami. I think he leaves for Miami Tuesday, or maybe even leaves Monday night to head down to Coral Gables. There are official visits scheduled right now to Miami and Ohio State in June. My gut feeling is that it doesn't last that long. I think that there's a chance that Favor Aki and his family will make a decision after this week's trip to Miami. Maybe he gets back to Ohio State one more time before he does that, but I feel like Ohio State has put itself in a winning position there with the offer, the opportunity for Favor Aki to really get to know Ryan Day a little bit. That was key. As we talked about last week, there is a kind of an unwritten rule for Ohio State in the state of Ohio that if a player is going to be offered, it has to be approved by and basically offered by Ryan Day himself. So getting Favor Aki on campus on Monday to meet with Ryan Day and get a chance to talk to him proved to be a deciding factor in getting him a visit and a scholarship offer. 6 foot, 190 from Rutherford B. Hayes High School in Delaware, Ohio. It is a sign, I think, Andrew, that it's not necessarily saying Ohio State doesn't feel good about other running backs. But when you're talking about Savion Hyder, Derek Cooper, even Jay Lamar, who visited on Thursday and Friday, it is to say, let's not put all of our chickens in one basket, because you know how this could go with those other guys. All of them are expected to still visit, and that's an important piece of the puzzle for Ohio State. Jay Lamar visited this weekend. Savion Hyder is still expected to visit. Derek Cooper is still expected to visit. Damon Ferguson is another running back that I think Ohio State is trying to get on campus. He's where's Damon Ferguson from? I'll tell you.
Jonathan Hatton just committed to Texas A&M. So
yeah. So that's one that we had on the list a couple weeks ago, as we were talking about the offensive or the running back possibilities. Damon Ferguson is from the Baltimore and Towson area. He's a less talked about guy, but another guy that Ohio State's got on the board. I think that the goal here is to take 2 running backs in the class of 2026. It has been the goal, unless you were feeling confident in a guy like Hyder that he was going to be the sole back. But I think Ohio State's in a really good position with Favor Aki and Jay Lamar after this last week. Lamar, a lot of people just assume he's going to Georgia. You yourself thought he was already committed to Georgia. But we'll see what happens there. Obviously, the Bulldogs are going to be tough to beat for an in-state player, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, I'm glad they offered Favor Aki. If you've got a 4-star kid in your own backyard who's Ohio State caliber, all the while you're going up against programs like Georgia for some of these other names, many of which are from the southeastern part of the country, you can't just kind of dilly-dally around and wait too late to offer somebody like Favor Aki with Miami out there. And I know they just got a commitment from that Javion Osborne kid. But Mallory, there we go. Osborne, yeah. Mallory, my bad. USC, I don't know why they offered him as a linebacker. I thought that was a little strange, and some of their insiders seemed somewhat optimistic for a while there, but before the Ohio State offer, I don't know, maybe he has an interest in linebacker too. But either way, the crystal balls came rolling in for Ohio State, and I'm totally in favor of this offer. No pun intended.
I would imagine that the USC optimism is just as a result of the fact that they already have one Ohio running back committed in the class of 2026 with Sean Alston, but Ohio State did not offer Alston and has not recruited him. And maybe they felt like Ohio State wasn't going to offer Favor Ike either, since they hadn't to this point. But clearly the Buckeyes are going all in that direction. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if he was decided by the spring showcase for Ohio State. So I guess we'll keep an eye on that. The last of the real individual players we're going to talk about before I let Andrew just kind of go down the list of asking questions about other visitors is Brock Boyd, the wide receiver from South Lake Carroll High School in the Dallas metro area, same high school that produced Quinn Ewers. Ohio State offered him back in January. He visited Ohio State on Wednesday. He's committed to TCU. And I think Ohio State now is in a position where they may very well get aggressive to flip the 6'2", 180-pound wide receiver. As a junior, he had like 1,900 yards and 20 touchdowns and 112 catches or something like that for South Lake Carroll. Exceptionally productive. He's not a slot guy. He's an outside guy at 6'2", 170 pounds. Just a really good football player. And again, I think we're at a point where it makes sense for Ohio State to take 4 receivers every year based on the productivity of the position, the NFL draft expectations for everyone being done in 3 years, and the fact that if you miss on a guy like Ohio State did with a couple of the receivers in the 2022 class, they're pretty much gone by the time that their junior year comes around anyway. So finding 4 guys every year makes sense. And I think Brock Boyd is someone that Ohio State fans should definitely be paying attention to. You're not going to be blown away by the ranking, but I do recommend putting on the film because he is really, really good and excellent body control, a guy that really understands how to create and maintain space between himself and defensive backs. And again, at 6'2", 170 pounds, 6'1", 170 pounds, whatever it is, like he's a regular size receiver. He's a good player. He is ranked as a 4-star by Rivals and by On3. So there's some mixed reviews about him as a prospect, but as a productive player, he's exactly what Brian Hartline wants, which is someone who's going to come in and just work and catch the football.
Yeah, I mean, he's from a powerhouse program, and I don't think anybody should ever question Brian Hartline's recruiting efforts. So that's really all I have to say on that one. I'm in favor of it. So
yeah, Ohio State tried, I remember a couple of years ago, to recruit Landon Sampson, who was a wide receiver out of South Lake Carroll when they had Quinn Ewers in the program. And he ended up going to South Carolina because the Buckeyes really didn't go all in. It will be interesting to see if this new philosophy for Brian Hartline, understanding that you have your first-round pick in Chris Henry, and then you've got Jaden Ricketts, and then a guy like this, Brock Boyd, is someone that you need to build a room a little bit different. And he's a really productive, really smart football player that Brian Hartline likes. So just keep an eye on that. I was told by Brock that like he's not likely to take a bunch of official visits. He wants to speed things up with his schooling and do a lot of summer classes. So I think he probably ends up making like a final decision between Ohio State and TCU in the next month or so, and likely only takes a visit to one school. Then that will probably be the school that he's going to sign with. So that's it for Brock Boyd, a player that we've never talked about before last week's show when we did the visitor preview, but he's a guy that Ohio State would absolutely say yes to today. And that is really when you're starting to try to figure out like how much attention should we pay to this guy? Like that's the bottom line. They would, I from a pretty direct source was told that they would say yes. So Andrew, who else from last week's visitors do you want to talk about before we dive into Monday's visitors on this episode of Talking?
Yeah, number one for me, just because the quarterback carousel is still as unpredictable as ever before. Bo Bentley, we talked about him a bit the other week. He did make it to campus, and then I believe he turned around and went right over to Athens after that. But any vibes or anything with that one, I guess?
I talked to Bo on Wednesday after he left, and he was really impressed by Ryan Day and what they do with the quarterbacks. I thought it was interesting that he didn't schedule an official visit with Ohio State. He said that, I will probably make it back to Ohio State for an official visit, which was a little bit surprising that he was that cool about it. I guess if you're trying to figure out where he stacks up on Ohio State's board versus where Ohio State stacks up on his, I think right now probably Ohio State has him as the quarterback in the class of 2026 that they're most likely to take. There were some questions about his size coming into the trip because his recruiting profiles, I've seen him listed at 6'1". I've seen him listed at 6'3". He was a good half inch to an inch taller than Ryan Day, who is 6'2". And so that answered some questions for me personally. If you watch Bo Bentley's film, man, you see a really, really good football player. We've talked about the fact that Ohio State has an opportunity with Texas and Texas A&M already having guys committed to get into the state and make a play here. What's most interesting, Andrew, is that I think that Bo Bentley's recruitment ties into Jared Curtis's recruitment, which ties into a couple other different things. So Oklahoma is the team that has been labeled as the front runner for Bo Bentley for a while. But Oklahoma has a quarterback committed in Jaden O'Neal, who Ohio State offered, and he camped at Ohio State last summer. Jaden just moved from California back to Oklahoma, and now he's being talked about as a potential flip to Georgia. But I don't think Georgia would take Jaden O'Neal unless Jared Curtis picks Oregon, and I don't know how that's going to play out yet. It's Ohio State. Ohio State's waiting to see if he picks Oregon or Georgia. If Jared Curtis picks Oregon and Jaden O'Neal doesn't flip to Georgia, then I think Georgia would be the most likely competition to Ohio State for Bo Bentley. If Jaden O'Neal does flip to Georgia, then Oklahoma opens up for Bo Bentley. And so then there's that, he lives basically an hour and 30 minutes away from Norman. So it's a weird, it's easier because Texas and Texas A&M are open or are off the board here at quarterback, but seeing these other dominoes fall, I think is really important. Ohio State loves Bo Bentley. And if today was signing day and they had to pick a guy and say, this is our quarterback, I think he would be it. But that battle seems like it's a balancing act. I talked to his father for a bit on his visit, and his dad has been to Columbus and has been there for work. And so he's familiar with it. Really thought he compared Ohio State and Columbus to the University of Texas at Austin, just the city and how he liked it. But first visits are very important. The fact that he didn't immediately schedule an official visit to Ohio State has me thinking that maybe he would prefer to be closer to home. But we'll see. Really good player, and I think he's the right fit for Ohio State in this class. But this is what you get when everyone else has players committed and you don't.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see if, as we get closer to December, if there's going to be a chance for one of the Ohio quarterbacks to get an offer. Obviously, Ohio State's going to have to miss on a few guys for that to happen, but just something that's kind of been on the back of my mind, I guess.
Yeah, because there's really only two that we can talk about, and that's Nathan Bernard and Matt Ponatoski. Again, Matt continues to feel like a guy who wants to play baseball and is likely going to play baseball instead of college football, or at least not exclusively college football. And at a place like Ohio State, they just don't have time to let you play both sports. And Nathan Bernard, I mean, he slowed things down. Nathan had told me back in November, he felt like he was probably going to commit sometime in the near future. Indiana at that time was the team that was at the top of the list. I don't know if the Hoosiers, because their profile is raising up a little bit, if they backed off or tried to slow things down, but it seems like Nathan Bernard has slowed things down. Other than those two in the state of Ohio, I don't know who's a legitimate threat. Unfortunately, Levi Davis at Olentangy, he just committed to the University of Ohio. But he's like 5'10.5", and it's just not. He just is not going to be able to be the quarterback at Ohio State at that size. I don't know who else is really a realistic option inside of the state. So it does get very peculiar from there if Bo Bentley ends up at Oklahoma or Georgia, because then you basically have to start from scratch again in 2020. Yeah,
that's fair. Ohio University, please show some respect to our beloved Bobcats.
Oh, yeah.
Jordan, cornerback, Jordan Thomas from New Jersey. Again, we talked about him a bit last week, and then he did make his visit. Not a name that I had really personally watched all that much. Like my focus had been almost entirely on Elbert Hill over the last couple months when I'm just kind of looking at things. Is it safe to say he and Elbert Hill are like 1A and 1B at cornerback? And then kind of what's the word coming out of his visit last week?
I don't know that it's 1A, 1B. I think that they're both ones as Ohio State views it, and in a class that they want 3 corners, as those two are both at the top of the list. It's not like you choose one or the other because they're so different. Elbert is maybe more of an inside guy, where Jordan Thomas at close to 6'2" is more of a pure outside guy. Elbert has the ability to play in or out, but he is smaller and shorter in stature. The vibe coming out of the visit is really great for Ohio State. Jordan told me he's likely to make a decision before the summer. Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame is one to watch there. He visited the Fighting Irish on Saturday. Notre Dame always does a really great job in New Jersey, and especially with kids coming from like private school backgrounds, which Jordan does. So that's one to watch. But I think Ohio State is probably the team to beat there. They do really, really well recruiting Bergen Catholic High School in New Jersey. That's where Quincy Porter's from. It's where Tywone Malone is from. They've done a nice job in that program in the last few years. So I think things are moving in the right direction for Ohio State and Jordan Thomas. If I was forced to play in or out today, I would say in for Jordan Thomas, which is a plus. And I think that he, alongside with Donovan Webb, who was on campus on Monday with Jordan, a safety from Texas, I think the Buckeyes are in the driver's seat for both of those battles right now. We'll see exactly how the Donovan Webb recruitment plays out, because there are going to be some questions about whether or not Jacob Weatherspoon is a safety or a corner, as he's already committed to Ohio State. But then if Braylon Womack and Blaine Bradford both want in at Ohio State, which is probably unlikely if we're calling a spade, but the Buckeyes are in the top 2 probably for both of those players. I don't know that they would take 4 safeties. And so then it comes down to where Jacob Weatherspoon slots. But I did see some stuff over the last couple of days that maybe Braylon Womack is trending towards Auburn because sister goes to school there. And certainly the Tigers play pretty aggressive on the NIL front. So that's one to watch there. But he's expected at Ohio State next week. So pretty big visits coming up for him.
Yeah. And Donovan Webb was the third one I was going to ask you about, actually, from the last week. I know Rivals, I think, has him as the number 10 safety in the country. And then the composite ranking might have him closer to 20 or something, I believe. So big picture safety wise, they could be looking at a class of Braylon Womack, ideally, and he seems to be the number 1 guy on the board. Donovan Webb, and then maybe another more hybrid type of player, like we know Gephardt committed to Penn or to Clemson, obviously, and now you've got whose name I always forget, the kid Simeon Caldwell. So that could be your safety class. Those 3 guys: Webb, Caldwell, Womack.
I mean, it's March 23rd as we record this. I'm certainly not going to be hemmed into saying that that's the prediction, but I think that that's a very realistic trio for Ohio State, especially if you keep Jacob Weatherspoon at corner. I think that's a very realistic trio. So next couple weeks are big for those guys, because obviously Donovan Webb just visited. We've got Braylon Womack making a pair of visits in the spring, and then you've got Simeon Caldwell making a pair of visits in the spring as well. So the Buckeyes are looking to really push the envelope with those guys. And then on the outside of that is Blaine Bradford from Baton Rouge, who obviously it's nearly impossible to take kids away from LSU, but they're swinging. And this is where the Caleb Downs impact starts to be a little bit of a momentum builder for Ohio State, because quite frankly, he's the best safety in the country, and every safety in the country is watching him play, and he's playing for Ohio State, and that's eye-opening. So that, I think, wraps the recap of the last week of Ohio State recruiting visitors on this episode of Talking Stuff. When we come back from this break, we're going to get right into next week's visitors, starting with Monday. Let's take a break, and we'll be right back. We are back on Talking Stuff. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. March 24th, officially here on Monday, Ohio State is hosting a number of players for unofficial visits, of course, because they're not allowed to host official visits yet. But we're going to start where we started this show, which is the offensive line, because I even know I have Landry Breed listed twice on this list because I'm a moron. But that's what happens. He's not visiting twice. There's not 2 Landry Breeds. He's visiting once. the Mentor, Ohio standout. He's visiting along with Zayden Krempin, who is a high 4-star offensive tackle from Texas. Zayden Krempin is on campus as we record this on Sunday. He'll visit for practice on Monday. That one could be an interesting one to watch. I think Texas is probably the team to beat, but Michigan is very high on his list, and he is extremely high on the Buckeyes as well. So Krempin might be a guy that leaves the state of Texas, and I wouldn't be surprised if he came to the Midwest if he did. Landry Breed is probably like on the border of where Jake Cook would have been last March. Okay, really good player. Ohio State likes a ton about him. I think they're just waiting to see a little bit more. It was the end of March, middle of April last year where Jake Cook took a major national step forward because he went to the Under Armour camp and the Rivals camp and dominated them both. We'll see if Landry Breed can accomplish something similar this spring. He is a player that I think Ohio State is very interested in and may very well offer, but I would be surprised if that happened on this trip. Linebacker Jacob Eberhardt from St. Louis. He is a freaky athletic, 6'2", 210-pound outside linebacker type. Not talked about a lot, but he's visiting Ohio State on Monday. James Laurinaitis and him have struck up a friendship/relationship in the last month or so, and Jacob wasted no time in getting himself to campus. And then in the class of 2027, Dakota Garant, who is from Michigan, he's a 5-star athlete in the class of 2027. He could be a wide receiver. He could be a cornerback. He is at the top of the list for Ohio State at both of those spots. He is a really good player. I think this will be like his 6th Ohio State visit since last summer, but he's been there a lot. Obviously, people expect that he will end up at Michigan, but the Buckeyes are very much in the fight there. Mason McDermott, an offensive lineman from Indiana, might be Indiana's best prospect in the class of 2027. He visited for a game in September, and he returns on Monday. Perrysburg, Ohio offensive lineman Reed Gherkin returns to Ohio State on Monday. He could very well be the best offensive lineman in the state of Ohio in the class of 2027. And then you have 2 defensive ends, James Harris from Texas and Deontay Seals from Alabama. Those are the highlights of Monday's visitors. Andrew, as you go down that list, who strikes your eyeballs and what questions do you have?
I admittedly don't know as much about some of these guys as last week's visitors, but I think I'm interested to see if Landry Breed doesn't, he's not going to get offered this week, as you said, but if he's somebody they could offer down the road, there's a handful of guys in Ohio we've talked about who might be like fringe guys. And I've said all along, if you can bring in 6 or 7 offensive linemen and your 6th or 7th best one is a kid from Ohio, like a Landry Breed, then I would be more than happy with that. So that's one I'm watching. Jacob Eberhardt, you said he has not been offered. Is that right? The Missouri.
Jacob Eberhardt has been offered. He was offered by James Laurinaitis about a month ago.
I see Missouri's listed as like the warm.
Maybe he wasn't.
Profile.
Maybe he wasn't offered.
I didn't see the offer in the profile I looked at. But that's the name I wasn't familiar with.
And he'll be offered on Monday. My apologies. I know that he had been someone that James Laurinaitis had been very interested in getting to know, but maybe he'll wait until Monday to offer. If Jacob Eberhardt leaves Monday without an offer, and you can come back on the show and please comment that I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about, but I fully expect he'll be offered on Monday. Interesting though, because Ohio State did host Storm Miller last week. They did host CJ Santa last week. Both players that I fully expect to end up in Ohio State's recruiting class. Although the Storm Miller stuff, I think most people for the first 6-7 months of his national recruitment have just assumed it's an Ohio State Clemson battle because his brother Blake plays at Clemson and is going to be a 4-year starter there. That is not the impression I get at all right now. I think it's Ohio State, West Virginia, Stanford, more so than Clemson, which I think if you're looking at it from a Buckeyes perspective, that's clearly something to be positive about. But Storm kind of marches to the beat of his own drummer a little bit, and I don't think he's going to be someone who is a lock for Ohio State, despite the fact that you look at those teams and you think, well, there's no way West Virginia or Stanford is going to compete with Ohio State. Storm Miller cares about relationships. He cares about the opportunity to go and develop. He's a football dude. I think he'll end up at Ohio State because of that, because James Laurinaitis is not going anywhere for a while and also a football dude. So I think it's a great combination. But when you talk about that potential fourth linebacker outside of Storm Miller, CJ Santa, and Sincere Johnson, who, even though he's not on this list here on the screen, Sincere, from what I understand, is supposed to visit Tuesday, March 25th. But we only have Monday's visitors listed. So that fourth potential linebacker, all we talked about in the past is Tyler Atkinson. I think that Jacob Eberhardt is a poor man's Tyler Atkinson. Is the best way I would describe his style and his gameplay. Like, he is a ferocious downhill, sideline to sideline. He's a freaky athlete at linebacker, and I think that he's a guy that will draw some heads, turn some heads as you start to watch his film. So
yeah. Last thing on this list, did you say Reed Gherkin might be the state's best offensive lineman for 2027? Is that what you said?
He's up there. I think between Mason Wilt at St. Clairsville and then Reynaldo Perez who's in Columbus, but he might be a two-way guy. He's at the Columbus Academy. He visited last week also for Ohio State, by the way. He might be a defensive lineman, but those are the three that I think are probably the best.
I was just going to say, we've seen, as we alluded to earlier, Tyler Bowen, offering all these 2026 guys. I guess I'm just kind of curious to see how he might handle the in-state crop for 2027 and beyond. So I don't know if that's a kid who could possibly, I see his current list of offers is MAC schools. And then of course you got Kentucky in there. I don't know if he's somebody that would be offered early on.
Gherkin visited Ohio State like 3 times last season and was someone that Justin Fry was very familiar with. But to use other players as a model for maybe what to expect on this trip, Ohio State did not offer Mason Wilt from St. Clairsville on Friday. They did not offer Patrick O'Brien from Cincinnati Moeller on Friday. Those are another two really. They did not offer Reynaldo Perez last week. So I think that the goal is to build those relationships, get all those 27s on campus in June for camp, and then decide from there if you're going to make the offers, because you're starting over. So one player that we did not mention who also visited last week was Jake Krull, of borderline 5-star defensive end from the IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. He's from Florida. I think Jake Krull, who then visited Michigan this week as well, I was really surprised because I know what his national profile is, and I know he's listed at 6'3", 230 pounds, and the number 5 ranked edge player in the country. I thought he was probably shorter than that, and he looked like a linebacker to me. I don't see that he grows into a full-on edge player unless he's a 3-4 outside linebacker, because I just don't see him unless he's got a growth spurt coming up still. I was a little surprised to see that with him. His official verified height on 247 Sports is 6'1.8". So he's listed at 6'3" on their profile, but then their verified height is 6'1". So take that for what it's worth when it comes to a player like Jake Krull, who I think really productive high school player, but then you start to wonder, like, how does he fit at the next level? And I don't think it would be at a defensive. That's all. What else you got? Anything else on these visitors before we go to the 4-minute offense and wrap this show up?
No, nothing else on these guys.
Cool. Let's go to the 4-minute offense and wrap this show up. What else is on your mind? Anything? You can talk about it. Let's use this as close your eyes.
No, I'm good. You sound like a therapist. Do you watch Shrinking on Apple TV? Have we talked about that?
Yeah, I love Shrinking. Great show.
Yeah. I'm like 4 episodes into the 2nd season. Just
terrific.
Incredible show.
Terrific show.
Yeah, highly recommend. I think the Ohio State fans probably need a little bit of therapy stemming from various occurrences on offensive line over the last few cycles. We've talked a lot about offensive line today. So right now it's March 23rd. So we're like 9 months away from the early signing period. And I'm only going to ask you one question. Just what is your best guess as of now, 9 months before the early signing period, what the 2026 offensive line class will look like come mid-December?
I think you start with Max Riley and Sam Greer and then Champ Smith, which I think are all very realistic options. And from there, it gets a little interesting. I personally believe that Landry Breed and Pete Eglitis both should probably be in the class. If it was up to me. That gives you 5 guys, and then you swing for the fences when it comes to Felix Ojo or Jackson Cantwell or Zayden Krempin, Aaron Thomas. I think when you look at the national rankings, right? So you've got, I'm going to pull up Zayden Krempin here. He's the one that's on campus as we record this. And he's listed as an interior offensive lineman on the On3 Sports website, right? So he's listed as the number 16 ranked interior offensive lineman. Darius Gray continues to say all the right things to me personally when we talk. He's a Virginia offensive lineman. I think he very well still could end up at Ohio State. I know there's a ton of buzz around South Carolina, Virginia Tech, everyone else around him. He keeps saying the right things. He's visiting Ohio State April 5th. I think he's very much a real possibility for Ohio State. Drew Evers, who visits Ohio State this coming weekend from Flower Mound, Texas, is another 4-star interior lineman. I would probably have Evers like penciled into the class right now if I was using pencil. I think he's a really good fit for the Buckeyes and what they want to do. And then I think you go out and you swing for one more offensive tackle, and then you're done. But of the group that's out there, I think that Felix Ojo is probably the best bet. Although I'm interested to see what happens when it comes to Evan Goodwin from Arkansas. I think he's got a frame that's really interesting. And I don't know that Ohio State's really involved for anybody else in the top 10 of the tackles that are out there. So if you gave me 4 in-state guys with Sam Greer, Max Riley, Pete Eglitis, and Landry Breed, and then you sign Champ Smith, Felix Ojo, and Darius Gray, like that'd be an unbelievably good offensive line haul for Ohio State. I think they have to sign 6 or 7 guys at the position. And so to tell you which guys are going to be, I don't want to sit here and pretend I know all the answers, but there's a lot of visits happening this week and a lot more visits happening in the next 3 weeks. But the relationships with Ojo and Darius Gray are beyond some of the others that Ohio State has. And the same with Drew Evers, who I really, really like. So I think that if you give me the 4 in-state guys, Champ Smith, and then either Evers and Gray, and one of those 2, and then a tackle like Felix Ojo, I think that's a pretty good. Now, it's going to take a lot of commitment from Ohio State. Like that's going to cost some resources now if you want to get Darius Gray and Felix Ojo. But I think if your goal is to make sure that you restock this offensive line and that the offensive line is Ohio State caliber moving forward, then that's what you have to do. So that's where I would go. That's where I put my money. If I was the one investing, I would put my money in Darius Gray, Drew Evers, and Felix Ojo, and then the in-state guys. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Last thing, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, but we saw USC kind of swipe that Chad Bowden, whatever, from Notre Dame guy, the player personnel, GM stuff. He's getting paid $1 million now.
And Wisconsin.
Last I saw, what's that?
They took Wisconsin's director of personnel.
Oh yeah, it's just crazy what's going on with all that stuff around the country. Last I saw, Mark Pantoni got like $350,000 in 2024, I think was his salary. I'm not asking about him staying or leaving. That's not my question. But like, how do you see his role? He does more transfer portal stuff now than he used to. Obviously, there wasn't a transfer portal 10 years ago. But how do you see his role kind of evolving or changing over the next handful of years? Or do you just see him getting more raises? I mean, what do you think?
As far as I know, he is not operating under contract at Ohio State right now.
That was what I thought, which is weird.
Something that Ohio State obviously needs to address in the near future. His role is so much more important now than it ever has been because he's the GM of the football program. And 5 years ago, when he was named the general manager of the football program, it wasn't about contracts. It wasn't about NIL. Now that is where 90% of his focus is. You have other guys around the program like Nick Murphy and Sam Petito, who are handling a little bit more of the day-to-day recruiting stuff. Those guys are doing a great job, but Mark's impact and influence is greater than it's ever been. And it will continue to be that way. I'm actually surprised that an NFL team hasn't tried to make him a GM yet. I hope for Ohio State's sake that they get his contract stuff situated. I don't think there's like any holdups. I don't know. I don't want to speak for anybody, but I don't know why it hasn't been signed yet. I just know that I asked about it a couple weeks ago and was told it still had not happened. So it's not like it's a forgotten thing for Ohio State. It's certainly a priority, but the role of these people behind the scenes is changing every single day. And like 90% of the phone calls 10 years ago, Mark Pantoni's job was setting up visits for kids around the country. And now it's dealing with agents all day long. And not just agents of high school players, but agents of your current players, agents of players who are in the transfer portal, agents of people who want to go in the transfer portal, agents on your team who are telling you that a player is going to go in the portal if they don't get this. I mean, it's basically just a nonstop phone call negotiation because there are no rules and there's no dead period when it comes to agent negotiations. So hopefully Ohio State understands that. I think they do. It is interesting when you see what USC has done. I think they signed, other than Chad Bowden from Notre Dame, they brought in Wisconsin's player personnel guy, and they brought in one more too, who I can't remember. And you've seen them be extremely aggressive in this cycle. I think they have the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the nation right now in the class of 2026. And so they're being aggressive. Ohio State is going to have to match it. We'll see when that happens with Mark Pantoni. I think there was some speculation back in like February or November, that like Florida had been sniffing around to try to see if Mark would be interested to leave. Obviously, that's his alma mater. It's where he's from. He's still at Ohio State. Florida hired a guy. So I think if he wanted to go somewhere else, he would have had plenty of opportunities to do it. So hopefully for Ohio State's sake, someone who is the tip of the spear in that industry remains in Columbus, because he is the guy that, stirs the drink, not just for Ohio State, but for the entire personnel industry, because he's sort of the guy that started it all, which is crazy. Like the grandfather of that industry, like 37 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
Interesting life. That's all for us. It's Sunday. It's 52 minutes long. We did our best. If you didn't like it, I'm sorry. If you did like it, please like it and then subscribe to the podcast and set your notifications, leave reviews, and tell people to watch Talking Stuff on the podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. He is Andrew Ellis. We appreciate your time. We'll see you next week.